I didn't even believe that mental health was a real thing until a few years back. Like, I was like, nah, you can just motivate your way through this. You can be positive. You can do whatever you want to do. I don't know about you guys at home watching this, but I feel like the last 6 months has been super testing on my mental health. I don't know why, like I just got a bit triggered at the start of the coronavirus and kind of got into a bit of a fight mode, and I don't think I've really came out the back of it. I know this is a bit of a different one for us to talk about today, and it's a bit uncomfortable for me just because, you know, it forces me to be a bit more vulnerable than I normally might like to be. I'm pretty good at putting on masks, but I sort of wanted to talk about mental health today in today's video, talked about mine and Lisa's experience with my mental health over the last few years, and, you know, just recognizing that no matter how other people are seen, everyone's going through their own stuff as well.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there's not a light at the end of the tunnel, that you can't live a fully functional life and still crush it. It just, you know, has been a process of figuring that out for us.
Yeah, can make it a harder journey.
Can make it definitely a harder journey.
Yeah, than it needs to be.
You know, so I'm super grateful, like, that I've had the anxiety that I've had. Like, that's what I've been suffering from. You know, as a pretty high achiever personality type, I place really high expectations on myself, and I think years and years and years of being my worst own critic and years and years and years of pushing myself, I just about 3 years ago got to sort of like a cracking point where I just had pushed so hard in one way for so long that I'd lost a huge amount of my identity. I'd lost a lot of my confidence. I'd lost a lot of, like, the things that I enjoy in life, and I was just doing, like, just living, and it took me by surprise. Like, I had no idea what was going on. I went to a GP, got every single test you can imagine. He's like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. In fact, you're ridiculously healthy. And I'm like, oh shit, like, what now? And he's like, maybe you should go and see a psychologist. And so that was sort of like, oh my God, like, naturally, like, what's wrong with me moment, but also like the start of a journey that we've both been on since.
Yeah. It's so good though. Like, it's helped so much, you know, just admitting, you know, not admitting, but I guess just working out what's going on and then getting help for it.
Yeah. Like, I think almost every single person that I come into contact with now that I understand what, you know, mental health looks like, I think is dealing with stuff, whether you want to admit it or not. Like, certain stages of life, like having kids, having high pressure jobs, trying to invest, trying to look after your health, like external things like coronaviruses come through and rock you a bit. And I think, you know, if we're all honest with each other, there's good moments and bad moments.
But it's really helpful once you kind of can put a label to the feelings that you're feeling, because then you can see what's triggering you, understand why you're reacting like that. Like, it's, you know, because I know you so well now and I understand anxiety so well. Like, I can see your triggers before you're to the point where you're just completely wound up in an anxious ball, you know what I mean? And we try and work through it before we get to the tipping point.
Fully, you know, I've been in the ball a couple of times. I've probably actually been in the ball for 3 months out of the last 6. There's actually been some days when I've jumped on camera and, like, I've been crying before I've got on the camera. Like, I've been so anxious and so self-conscious, and so not ready to put myself out there. But the beautiful thing about me is, because of my personality type and competitive sportive background, like, I'm always able to do what needs to be done, and it hasn't really affected my performance. But it does affect how I feel and who I am on the inside. What I wanted to do today is, like, talk about your experience with my mental health as well as mine, and also talk about some of the stuff we just mentioned, like triggers and processes and tools that you guys can use to go out there and get help, because I feel 1,000% better than I did 3 years ago. And I have bad weeks and sometimes even get caught in a cycle for a few weeks, but I'm able to, like, get back to normality much quicker now than I used to be able to. So let's talk about what it's actually like to live, like, with a crazy like me.
It's the best and worst. It's like, it's easier now, we know what's going on. I think there was a fair few years there where it just got really bad. Like, anxiety was just ruling our life. And then I think when you have a partner who's really anxious, like, you're trying to, like, help them, but you're just getting pulled along with the craziness. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, like,
I'm not crazy.
Why am I being so like full on about everything? So yeah, I think first like identifying that you have anxiety, and like, you know, now when it gets really bad, we're like, okay, you need to go see your psychologist, you need to do all the things that help you. Like, you have lots of tools in your bag now that can help you when you get in those states, which really, really helps. But yeah, it is really full on. And I think a lot of people talk about living with anxiety, and nobody kind of like thinks about the person who has to live with that person who has anxiety.
This video is really like living with the person living with anxiety, because sometimes I think it's harder. Like, what's your experience been for all of those people out there? Like, I can almost guarantee that every person watching this video has either felt anxious or that knows someone that does, or is actually living and sitting next to a partner that's got it at the moment. Hopefully having a laugh about it, because acknowledging it and accepting it is a big part of it, you know what I mean? So
I've been reading this book lately, which is an amazing book called Untamed by Glenna Doyle, and I just read the part that she talks about anxiety, and she talks about is people living too high when they have anxiety. So I have girlfriends who have really bad anxiety as well, and they just seem to like hook onto something. Like, when their anxiety gets triggered, it could be anything. It could be like a fight they had with someone, or it could be, I don't know, it's usually things that are kind of out of their control a bit, and then they just like stew on it. So it's like completely like clouds their thoughts, like it's all they can think about and talk about, because they want to fix it, they want to control it and stuff like that. And sometimes it's just things that are so like, trivial, as an outsider, you look and you're just like, what is going on? Like, this is just not a thing. But for them, it's such a real thing. And I guess you got to realize that for them it's really intense, you know. I
remember hearing you gave me the podcast from is it Usher?
No, Osher,
who's like the host of The Bachelor and the old absolute legend Andrew G. And he had this anxiety that global warming was so real that when he was walking down the street, he could see the water 10 meters above him, and he was underneath the water, and he was absolutely losing the plot. Now, to the rest of the world, that is just crazy. But in his own mind, when he hooked so much onto that story, there was nowhere to go for him.
I think he ended up getting like psychotic anxiety, because he just was not dealt with, and he kept charging ahead when he needed to just like get some help, which I think I kind of wanted to play that for you just to scare you, to be like, let's get serious about this, because I could see you seeing the water rising and we could be there, you know.
Yeah, for sure. You know, so like, living with the person with anxiety is really rough, because you're obviously going through your own stuff as well.
Yeah.
And you're trying to pretend that you're not, and you're trying to be strong. But like, the reality is neither of us have the tools to deal with stuff. Like, that's why there's people that go and train for 7 years just before they're even legally allowed to start talking about it with you.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's like in that book I've been reading, she describes it perfectly. It's like there's a body snatcher. Like, it's like your partner is physically there, but they're just mentally not there. They're just like, it's like living with a ghost kind of thing. Like, you can see them, but they're not really there.
Yeah,
so I think that's the hardest part, because you're like, can you watch the kids or whatever? And then you're like, I know they're not, you know, they're watching them, but they're not mentally like predicting, you know, they could fall off that, or, you know what I mean? It's just like, they're just so clouded.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I learned from my psychologist about anxiety is that it clouds the frontal lobe, which is where like the logic comes from. And so it's sort of like alcohol, just like, I think after 3 drinks, that frontal lobe, you know, is switched off, and that's why everyone loves drinking so much. It's kind of like, it's the same with anxiety. Like, it sort of shuts us off your logical ability, and so you go back into your lizard brain, your emotional brain more, and it's kind of like you're living there, and that place is much more survival, and that's why like adrenaline and cortisol increases. It's why like breathing becomes shallower. It's why things start to become observed as threats rather than opportunities, and it's just a defensive place to be living as opposed to just a flow place to be living.
Yeah. So what are some of your tools that you use now to like, when you're starting to get in that state, or when you're deep in that state, that you can just like pull out to help you deal?
You know, one of the books that I read that massively helped me was called The Happiness Trap, and all that does is, sometimes when you've got anxiety, you can hook onto ideas in your mind that may or may not even be real. And often I have to say to Lisa, like, is this a real thing, or am I just caught in my head right now? And half the time she's like, you're just caught in your head. It's not a real thing at all. I'm not talking about weird stuff. I'm just talking about like ideas. So one of the things that I've learned from that book is starting to observe your mind and your thoughts differently. And they talk about this a lot in meditation, in Buddhism, in yoga, and that is just creating space between yourself and your thoughts. So instead of like me going, oh my God, the property market's going to crash, which was my first thought when the coronavirus came through, which was a natural thought that a lot of investors had because the stock market was literally falling down around us at that time. It's, you know, oh, that's the property market crash thought, you know what I mean? It's just, it goes into that category, or it's more like I'm having the thought that the whole economy is going to collapse. Like, it's a thought, it's not who you are, because sometimes when you've got anxiety you hook onto them. So that's been really helpful, like being able to process and identify thoughts more logically.
Do you think as well, like, it's easier to identify that that's more an anxious thought if you're really obsessive about it?
Fully.
Yeah.
You know, so another thing that I've found really helpful is like I write a list of the things that are the opposite of the thought. Like, what's the logic that this thought is not 100% truthful? And it's like, well, I wrote down this list of 30 things that the Australian government's in a strong position. They're stepping in to help people, that property prices in Brisbane haven't actually risen in 12 years, that most people are actually earning more income right now, as crazy as that sounds compared to this. Only a small niche in society is actually being affected. And I logically worked my way through it, but you know, those things can be super helpful. Taking a step back from there, like Lisa calls them triggers, and so do I, and that is identifying when you're getting wound up before you get to that point, like swinging off the scale. So my psychologist and I talk about just like over time you learn tools or scaffolding that enables you to stay in a more balanced state, as opposed to like the big swings that come through every now and then with an anxious or depressed person. And so my triggers are, I naturally seem to start doing everything that's worse for me when I get anxious. I stop exercising, I stop wanting to hang out with friends, I stop communicating with Lisa, I become a bit like devoid or like not quite there.
List making, oh my God, if I see him making lists now, I'm like, what's going on?
I start making lists about
like not just in work hours, I'm talking about like on weekends we'll all be hanging out in the backyard and Ben will run inside and make a list and I'm just like, oh God, here we go.
When I start like obsessively goal setting about like this is where I want to be, or I used to look at the numbers when I start eating like really sugary foods and a lot of it, or I haven't drunk for ages now, but when I used to go out and just want to drink so that I could like just switch my mind off and think that was better, but then for the next few weeks after that I was just in like my own version of hell, which was my mind just anxious state.
Mine too. It was my version of hell too.
Yeah. You know, like going to bed later, like breathing less shallow, like forgetting to do the things that are healthy. So my psychologist and I talk about decisions like towards your value system or away from it. And so when you start to get anxious, I notice that I make decisions away from what I really value.
Yeah.
Where now I'm much more aware of like what's important to me, my family, my health, like my clients, like doing meaningful work.
Yeah.
Chilling out, like having rest and balance and not overworking. And so I make decisions towards that are life enriching and better for me.
Yeah.
And it's just been a process, like slowly over time, but we've just come off the back of a really rough 3-week period where I was as anxious as I think I've ever been in my life. But even going through that now, I still have some perspective, even though on some days I can't figure it out. I still have perspective, which is awesome. And even the other night, Lisa's like, I think it's time for you to start regularly seeing the psychologist again, just as a maintenance thing. And then you sort of get on top of it and you can sort of peel back a little bit from there.
And I find as well, when you're really deep in that anxious state, like when someone in your life tries to bring up something that's helpful, like your anxiety just wants to attack that person so bad. It's like, nope, I'm here and I'm staying and don't try and get rid of me. So like just prepare for that. But then I guess like it's always like you attack and then like after a little bit you're like, oh, I'm sorry, no, you're right. And then,
Eckhart Tolle talks about it in his book, A New Earth, and it's like that's that pain body or that ego. So when my anxiety like has its time in the sun, it is really defensive to try and stay there because it doesn't get as much time in the sun now as it used to. And so like even my brother the other day, he's like, man, like we were talking at the beach after work and I was like just having a breakdown and he was just like, you know, you've just let the anxiety take hold of you at the moment, and it's like, yes, I've got him, and everything's a threat and everything's scary. And then it's like, even the acknowledgement of that and the acceptance of that and observing that is like, yeah, I don't have to live like this. I don't have to be this way. I don't have to like constantly make lists or look at the future or chase the next goal or not slow down or not just enjoy every part of the journey and be present.
Yeah.
But it's a weird thing. It's like, I didn't even believe that mental health was a real thing until a few years back. Like, I was like, nah, you can just motivate your way through this. You can be positive. You can do whatever you want to do.
I know. I remember saying something super offensive when I was really young to a girlfriend of mine. Like, you know, I was trying to justify to her that depression wasn't a thing. And she was like, my dad has depression. And I was just so young and I just didn't know what I was talking about. And yeah, I think until you've lived with someone with it or you've experienced it, like, it is a very, very real thing. Yeah.
You know, for those of you watching this, like, taking the pressure off, like, one of the best books that Lisa gave to me a few years back was a book called Slow.
Yeah.
And that's helped me put in practice some really good habits. Like, I don't look at my phone almost at all anymore. I've got a work phone which is completely left at work, so I don't get triggered with work when I'm at home. Like, I don't do the social media, which is very triggering because I can't really control the positive narrative there. And often I'll get things that like flare me up. So I've like really taken a step back there. Like, I make sure I do a range of things over the course of a week to keep me in a better position. And I love having a beer. Like, man, I love having a beer with the boys. One of my favourite things in the world to do is like a pub crawl with the boys in Sydney and just like go to all the Irish pubs. And, you know, like, I love travelling and having like a beer at sunset or after a surf. But it's like, I found for me that at this stage of my life, I'm just not ready to deal with the weeks after that of like being in my head. And so it's like, you know, that plus like massive sugar binges and stuff are just things that I've had to like let go of, that obviously ultimately make me feel better long term. But it's like, it's a tricky thing. Like, when you start looking after one part of your life, you start noticing the other parts as well.
Yeah.
It's made me way more committed to helping our clients and way more committed to putting real, honest content out there for you guys to listen to and to like or not like. You know, what are your tips for the partners out there, whether they're the guys or the girls sitting next to someone like me? It's like the elephant's in the room, but it hasn't really like been discovered yet.
You like, hey, that's you.
This is you, man.
I think I've had to learn that I'm the anchor. And you'll just do you. Like, you will spin off the planet, you'll come back down, and I just don't let myself go on that ride with you anymore. Like, I used to be, you know, I'd get all in a tizzy when you're in a tizzy, and now I'm just like, oh, Ben's just spinning off. He's, you know, we're working on it, but I'm not going to spin off the planet with you.
Yeah.
And to just keep doing your own thing as well. Like, don't cancel your plans because they're anxious. Don't stop going to your classes or doing whatever makes you feel good. Like, recently I started doing like aerial acrobatics. They do like the hoops and the silks, and I go, and it's just so fun, like the funnest time ever. So I think just keep looking after yourself as much as you're trying to look after them, and just kind of, they're going to spin off the planet every now and then, and just don't get dragged along with it.
Yeah. You know, I'd also say that, you know, you can go to your GP and you can get these 10 referrals for a massively discounted price to see a psychologist, because psychologists are expensive without that Medicare discount. You know, you're not going to always find the right psychologist first. You might have to go through a few.
Yeah, don't just settle with a bad one because you're too scared to try another one if they're just not working for you.
If it's not working, you know, generally in the first few sessions, it's not going to work. You're not going to see any progress because you're so defensive. But like, I really think that it's been one of the best things that I've done. And the times where we've just been in incredible flow states is when I've been actually going weekly or fortnightly and just getting to unload and to like catch my thinking and to just work on myself. And there are so many incredible tools like that you can use, whether it's meditation or observing your thoughts or categorizing them or slowly making positive changes in your life or understanding what's important to you and actually saying no to everything else. And just like, you know, being there and just going through the journey as well, and knowing that more control, more trying to fix it isn't necessarily going to change it. Just letting it go and letting it be there actually will. And it sort of dissolves itself. Like in this book I read, it said like, there's two things an anxious or depressed person can do. They can drive the boat out to sea with demons underneath the boat, which we all have, and you can you know, drive around at sea for the rest of your life lost, but the demons are locked underneath the deck. Or you can just say, fuck it, allow the demons to come up, but know that you can get to shore and get to safety and get to the life that you actually want to be living. And it's like, I spent a lot of time just drifting around, using all sorts of things to try and suppress it, whether it was exercise or eating too much sugar or drinking too much or overworking or, you know, trying to control my life to the point where everything was like meticulous, having OCD. And it's like, that's one way to live that I just don't want to spend the next 70 years of my life doing. Like, I want to be contributing. I want to be living my best life. I want to be doing the things that are meaningful with our family as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, like, there's help out there if you need it. And yeah, I definitely think it's worthwhile going through the journey, even though some weeks are hard. Like, I love our life now compared to what it was 3 years ago.
Yeah. And I mean, we've been together for 12 years, so that's a long stint of us just trying to figure it out on our own. Yeah.
You know, we've been flirting with the idea at the moment of like, is it actually worthwhile potentially even going to that next step and looking at medication?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go see the GP and stuff like that. That really scares the shit out of me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I feel like there's still such a stigma when there shouldn't be, you know?
Yeah. It's just like we've talked about, like the potentially letting go of control. But, you know, like it would be nice to sort of maintain a flow. I just don't know where I'm at with that at the moment. And obviously for me, you need to talk to the psychologist and the GP about that. And if it's actually something that I need, or if it's just, I've just gone through a few tough weeks and, you know, that's still just leaking out of my body and I just need some time to sort of recover again.
Yeah. I think the last thing I want to say is, like, there was another bit in that book I'm reading where she talks about like continuing to look after your anxious self when you're in a good space. Because she was like, you know, you know, if you're on medication, keep taking your meds and seeing your psychologist and stuff, even when you're in a good state, because those anxious states are coming. You know what I mean? You don't want to be like frantically clawing at things the second it comes because you haven't been, like, you know, setting yourself up. Because it doesn't go away, I don't think. I don't know. It might, maybe for some people it does, but for us it hasn't. So it's like, I think once it's over, we're like, oh, good, we're over it.
Yeah,
like,
every time I'm like, yes, it's gone.
Like, oh no, here it is again. So it's like, yeah, that's something we're going to start implementing.
Yeah, just the consistency of like self-care and like self-love and self-respect and just letting go. I've let go of so many old stories that I had that I was carrying around that were like mums and dads stories or, you know, previous bosses stories. And it's like the growth that you get through letting go some of this stuff like allows you to actually become the best version of yourself. And I think ultimately that's what we want for you and what we want for ourselves and what we're trying to achieve. So hope you don't mind this sort of weird chat. It's like, as you can see, I'm awkward even having it, but I'm grateful to be able to share my experience and hopefully it helps some of you guys like reach out for some help if you need it.
Yeah, awesome.
Cheers.